As the campaign nears its midpoint, the Conservatives are trailing in a race they once seemed sure to win. Is this line of attack the path back to victory? And hanging over it all, stock market churn and instability as Donald Trump's tariff plan continues to shake global economy. There is a lot to get to. Power and Politics starts right now. Conservative supporters gathered in force near Edmonton last night, coming together for the biggest rally of this election.
We need a conservative government in this used to be beautiful country.
For the first time ever in my entire life, I'll be voting Conservative this year. I've always voted Liberal, yeah. I don't like what the Liberals have done. I feel the country has gone downhill in the past 10 years, and it's very noticeably so.
I have respect for Donald Trump, and I have respect for Pierre. They fight for two different countries, and that's our responsibility to support him.
Feels like he's, sort of like a savior for Canada,
He's going to do a lot for us in Alberta and all over Canada.
I don't believe the polls. You look at the rallies, okay, you look at the rallies behind him, you look at the people that are talking on Facebook.
What happens here if Carney wins?
Hopefully we leave. What's the point anymore, right? We don't get anything out of this relationship.
Well, many there are hopeful for a Conservative win, which makes sense when you look at the size of the crowds Pierre Poilievre has been drawing, as thousands have flocked to see the man they want as the next Conservative Prime Minister. And last night, they heard from the man who was the last Conservative Prime Minister.
Canada right now needs change more desperately than it perhaps ever has. I am in a unique position in this federal election. I am the only person who can say that both of the men running to be Prime Minister once worked for me. And in that regard, my choice, without hesitation, without equivocation, without a shadow of a doubt, is Pierre Poilievre. Our country faces today another historically challenging time in the form of the Trump administration. There is no sugarcoating that. But the bulk of the problems that afflict our country, falling living standards, declining employment and housing opportunities, rising crime, the growing divisions between our regions and our people, these were not created by Donald Trump. They were created by the policies of three Liberal terms, policies that the present Prime Minister supported and wants a fourth Liberal term to continue.
Well, the pictures of the crowds, the partisans, and the former Prime Minister tell one story. The problem for the Conservatives is that the polls tell a different story. The CBC poll tracker has Mark Carney on track for a majority government. The aggregate of public opinion polls has the Liberals ahead by 7 percentage points. Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute, and she's here to dig a little deeper behind those top-line numbers. Shachi, good to see you in person. Thank you for being here
Nice
today.
to be here, David.
Okay, the poll tracker has Liberals +7. Angus Reid has Liberals +10. Same trend line. Margin of error, though, is where it is. Let's look at next level down. Choice for Prime Minister. Mark Carney also leading there.
Yes, and sometimes these indicators are as important as those top-line numbers. And while the top lines show us that the Conservatives are not out of this yet, it's a little bit of a different story on who's considered best Prime Minister. Half the country looks at Mark Carney and says that guy would make the best PM, compared to just 28%. So really, Carney on this metric is leading 2-1 over his main opponent. Pretty devastating.
Right, and Carney running above the Liberals, Pierre Poilievre running below the Conservatives. And one of the other challenges for Mr. Poilievre is his favourability numbers have deteriorated throughout this campaign.
Yeah, they've deteriorated and they were never great to begin with. That's what's really important. Even when the Conservatives were sitting on a 20-plus point lead, it was much more to do with frustration with the Justin Trudeau Liberals and a sense that maybe the Conservatives had better policy ideas at a time when cost of living, housing affordability, immigration, you name it, was not getting fixed. But what Pierre Poilievre has failed to do is really make inroads in terms of introducing himself and warming himself up to voters, particularly women voters. Big gender divide on this issue, but his favorability has been underwater, net negative for basically forever.
Right, so 60% unfavorability when you're the challenger and the opposition leader is tough when you're already running below your party. Mark Carney, on the other hand, despite the attacks, despite the criticism, his favorability numbers holding okay.
Well, not only are they holding okay, he's the only leader who's running candidates across the country. So he's the only leader between Poilievre and Singh with net positive favorability, right? His favorable numbers are better than his unfavorable numbers. That's not the case for the other two leaders. And that has been a little bit of the story of his ascendancy as leader, because he came in as a relative unknown. People didn't know who he was. And it's not like they're saying, we're not sure about him. They're saying, we like him.
Okay, so the Liberals are ahead in the top line numbers, ahead as best choice for Prime Minister, and people generally have a better impression of the leader. That all is a good trend line if you're running in an election, but we're only halfway through. So how locked in are these numbers? This is the other big thing.
Still mushy, but getting less mushy and more solid. So if you look at where Liberal voters were, and remember that big surge that came very, very quickly. When we think about numbers in February, locked-in Liberals were only about 38% of that base.
Well, that's way up now when we look at these latest numbers, right?
It's almost doubled.
Yeah.
Now, they're still chasing the Conservatives, right? You're the Conservatives. You can bank 3/4 of the voters that say that they're going to show up for you. They're going to need them. They're going to need to pull every single voter they have in every single part of the country, not just in their strongholds. It's not so good. It's pretty no bueno for the NDP right now, with only 1/3 of their base. This is their existing base. This is to say nothing of NDP voters who are already gone.
Yeah, this is who's left in those piles.
This is who's left.
Yeah.
This is who's left. And for the Bloc, they're sitting above 500. They'll take that, but they're going to need to do more than that in a dogfight in Quebec with the Liberals.
Okay, so on that, just, the NDP vote has gone largely to the Liberals. A lot of the Bloc vote in Quebec has gone to the Liberals. 62% of the Liberal vote is locked in, but it seems like they've got another chunk that's quite accessible in the BQ and the NDP. What should we look for in terms of, what are you watching for in terms of actual movement in the shares that are not locked in the time that is left in this campaign?
So what's been a little bit, call it weird, call it eerie about the last 3 weeks is we saw those numbers moving, very dynamic, very crazy, and then all of a sudden we've started to see some stabilization. There hasn't been a lot of movement since the writs were issued. So as we start to run out of days, we're at this halfway point, as the parties run out of runway. There's a debate, there are 2 debates coming up, obviously. We'll see if there's any movement around that. But then at some point, if you are the party strategist, if you're the campaign workers, you are less worried about people switching, and you're more worried about people saying they're not quite made up their minds, they're not quite solid, and are those people going to show up? Right. So at what point does conversion mean locking in a voter for your own party? And at what point does conversion actually mean, are you going to go cast a darn ballot or not?
Right.
And that will be what this comes down to.
Can't imagine anyone sitting out this election, but you never know.
I expect turnout will be a lot higher.
All right, Shachi Kurl, president of the Angus Reid Institute. Good to see you today, and we'll see you back here again tomorrow.
Oh, goody.
How many people do you think we had last night?
Thousands.
Well, that's pretty obvious. I think you can be more precise than that.
I don't. I mean, the party said 10,000 registered. There's reports of 15. I really can't say.
One last question. When was the last time we had a rally that big in Canada?
I don't know. I've never been to a political rally that big, I don't think.
You know a lot about politics.
Well,
You're a very well-informed person. I know that if there were a bigger rally than that, you would know about it. I think so. But I think it was pretty incredible. Were any of you there? Yes. Magic, eh? Wow. Incredible. Listen, I think to have 10 or 15,000 people at one political rally, this is a movement like we've never seen because people want change. They want to put our country first for a change.
Well, look, the Conservatives are definitely winning the battle for crowd size, but the polls would suggest it's the Liberals who are winning the battle for votes and, of course, seats. And let's begin there with the power panel. Emily Nicola is a columnist for Le Devoir. Michel Cadario is a former Liberal National Campaign Director. Françoise Boivin is a former NDP MP. And here with me in the studio, Kate Harrison is a Conservative political analyst. All right, it's good to see you all, gang. It's good to have you back. Kate, let's start with you. You saw the numbers there from Shachi with Mr. Poilievre polling below his party and his negatives way up over the course of this campaign. Is a once certain win just slipping away from the Conservatives right now?
I think that this has been a roller coaster of a campaign, and obviously things are much tighter now than they were when Justin Trudeau was in the seat. Obviously, there was a lot of people who were really dissatisfied with the way the country was led for the last 9 years, and they were parking their vote with the Conservatives because they wanted a change in direction. Mr. Carney is new. I would say that Canadians still don't really know much about him, but they observe in him kind of the antithesis to Donald Trump, and that's attractive for a lot of voters. So this is certainly a really tight race, but I don't want to neglect what Mr. Poilievre's talking about in terms of that groundswell and enthusiasm of support that we're seeing at rallies, that we've seen, I would say too, David, not just during the election campaign, but when he was even campaigning to become leader. He was pulling out major crowds during the leadership campaign and since that time. And so I think that there's something really exciting happening within the Conservative movement in Canada. People really being attracted to the message that Mr. Poilievre is putting out there. The key for the Conservatives, as it would be for any party, is how does that translate to your get out the vote strategy, and what is the plan to actually move those people to the polls, many of whom, as we heard from the interviews, have not voted before. They've not necessarily taken part in elections, so what's the plan to get them engaged at the polls?
There's no question that inside the Conservative movement he reigns supreme, but if you look at best choice for Prime Minister, Carney's beating him 2-1. If you look at, he's underwater in the positive, negative, and that's a tough spot for an opposition leader to be. So I mean, what does that say though about the ability for that to resonate with the larger Canadian electorate in this campaign?
Yeah, I'd say two things. The first one is, it's important for Mr. Poilievre to project as a Prime Minister. I think we have seen from him over the course of the last number of weeks real substantive policy and ideas on the table and specifics about what he would do to lead Canada, not just through the immediacy of this tariff threat, but moving beyond that into real concrete policy. But there does need to be an attempt as well to really, as I say, capitalize on the new voters that you're bringing in. And I'm thinking really specifically, David, of millennials and Gen Z. So what are we putting in the window for that voter cohort? Not necessarily the 60-plus crowd who seem to be gravitating more towards the Liberal, but what are we putting in the window that really makes sure this group shows up and votes on Election Day when they haven't necessarily been engaged?
Right. Michelle's bringing you in here. I mean, as the campaign has gone on, the Liberal lead has widened and sustained itself. And while it was largely driven by the baby boomers, more and more polling now is showing pulling even and even pulling ahead with some of the younger cohorts. What do you just make of this dynamic and the situation the Conservatives find themselves in with these big in-person rallies, but then these significant in-poll deficits?
Well, listen, I'm not going to take away from the Conservative. Those numbers that they're having at their rallies, they're impressive. As a political organizer, hats off. What I would worry about, though, is that the problem that people have with Pierre Poilievre in terms of the stacking up against Mr. Carney as who's going to be the best Prime Minister. If all people see in these rallies is someone who is kind of drawn to everything that they don't want to see in their Prime Minister, someone who is hyper-partisan, someone who is name-calling, and someone who is talking about the size of their rallies, because that just reminds them of Donald Trump. And, it's very easy, and all politicians are guilty of this. When you get into a big crowd, you want to play to that room. Mm-hmm. And you forget that the most important audience are actually the people who are undecided, who might be peeking in to see what's going on in that room. And so, while it's a very impressive organizational feat, it's not necessarily actually helping them in terms of what they need to do. I think that it's, it remains what the election is all about who they want to see as Prime Minister to go up against Donald Trump. Every day, Mr. Trump is doing something different and causing just this week, the stock market's crashing and people are losing their retirement savings, and people are very, very concerned. And in that, they want somebody who's stable, and they want somebody who's competent, and they want somebody who has that kind of economic prowess that can guide the country through. And I think that's why the numbers behind Mark Carney are what they are, and why he's running so much ahead of the actual party label.
So Francoise, look, we're right around the midpoint, or just, however you measure the midpoint of the campaign. So there's still a lot of time to go. But, the data shows that voters for the Liberals and the Conservatives are increasingly locking in, right? That the real room for movement is still with the Bloc and with poor old Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, because they're in a very difficult spot in this stretch run. I mean, what do you make of this? I mean, 100 days ago, it was going to be Prime Minister Poilievre and a mountain of seats, and right now, it looks like holding even is kind of where they're at right now.
Well, maybe some days the historians are going to say that Pierre Poilievre peaked too fast. He peaked right before the prorogation, and we'll have books written on the whole story. It's not over. I'm a strong believer in campaigns, but when I hear the people around me, Michelle is right. People are, and what Shachi was saying earlier is that it seems more and more whatever you throw at people and that you say to them and that you prove to them, and you talk about the bad years of the Liberals and so on, and I use the same rhetoric as the Conservatives, minus words like grifter and so on, which I was told today what it meant, and never to use it against anybody. But that being said, and people look at me and they say, don't care, don't want to hear. You were asking what they need to see from Pierre Poilievre, and they haven't seen yet. Yes, a smilier guy, but they want to see maturity. They want to see a person at the helm that reassure, because I've never seen people more frightened than I see them now. So when I transpose that with all those fantastic rallies, I mean, a lot of political parties are probably jealous of what they are achieving, and kudos to their organization, because I remember having one in Gatineau for Jack Layton, and it took everything we got to get 1,500 people in 48 hours. So to get 10 or 15,000, depending who you talk to, it means that there's a good organization. But that's for people who wants to vote Conservatives. And a lot of people, I'm one of those who suspect that it's going to be a super high turnout because of des enjeux, je me rappelle pas comment on dit, how do you say enjeux, the objective of
issues. The ballot question, the issues of the election, the ballot question.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it.
Thank you. Exactly. Just because of that, a lot of people that are not necessarily in the database of the political parties, that they will not even need to get out to vote. They will get out to vote running. So it's hard for Poilievre to change his whole persona. Even if he smiles more, people are just not buying the smiles as much as he would like.
So Emily, look, the rallies, it's an impressive logistical feat. There's some debate in campaign professional circles whether it's the right use of energy and resources as opposed to voter identification or other things. I don't know. I've never run an election campaign. But whatever it is, the people are showing up in those airport hangars, the stadiums. The polling numbers are going in the other direction from the crowd size. And it looks like a lot of it could be Mr. Poilievre, because he is polling below his party. And that is a bad cocktail in an election with this much time left.
It is. I will also say that it is a very impressive rally in Alberta. So
no, it's the heartland. There's no question. It's the heartland. Yeah.
It's exactly. So it's not to diminish the accomplishment. Even a crowd that size in Alberta is impressive. But in terms of the disconnect between that and the polls, you have a part of the answer there. Around me and just the people that I speak to, I see a lot of people, the generation of my parents, who would normally vote for the Bloc Québécois, diehard sovereignists, very much committed to pinching their nose and voting for Mark Carney. Think the same with the younger progressive crowds who would be leanings toward the NDP. And the people who are doing that are doing it out of a sense of duty and fear. And fear, not of, sometimes a lot of times fear in politics plays in terms of fear of someone else or fear of an issue, and it's very much survival instinct.
Right.
That plays. And that isn't people who will show up at rallies. This isn't people who even identify as liberals. And so in Ontario, you would see the same, I think, with people who have been voting, for example, provincially for Doug Ford, who are considering to cast their ballot for Mark Carney. Those are not voters that are translatable to rally sizes, but those are voters, I think, who, because they're coming from a sense of our country is in danger, we need to do this, they are committed to show up at the polls. And so that is, I think, what is happening right now. And so this is why I'm seeing something that is basically ABC movement, anything but conservative, that isn't necessarily speaking its name. That isn't something that Mark Carney himself is speaking about. He doesn't need to, and it's very much happening quietly in the dinner at the dinner tables of a lot of people around the country. It is we are in danger right now, and we do not need Pierre Poilievre as Prime Minister while we are in danger.
Yeah,
it seems to be the issue. That's what Pierre Poilievre seems to be having a problem to counter-argue against.
Right, and just to put some context out there, the Edmonton rally was the biggest one, but we've seen big rallies in Winnipeg, in Surrey, in Hamilton, in the Don Valley North region of Toronto, and even in Prince Edward Island and Quebec. So they have been everywhere. Facts and context are important
5,000
things.
in Quebec, by the way. 5,000 in Quebec.
Right.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't think they did a rally in St. John's. I would have known about that one.
Oh.
But yeah, they did a thing at Petty Harbour. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But look, obviously the challenge has been that Mark Carney's numbers are high in the polls. He's pulling ahead of the party. So one way you deal with that is to sharpen your political attacks. And what we saw with Pierre Poilievre today is that he hammered Mark Carney's reputation. Have a listen to this.
Mr. Carney is not a businessman. He is a political grifter who has used his political influence to turn decisions that profit his company at the expense of workers and seniors. And that is exactly how he would govern the country.
Okay, Kate, I wonder, is this the right play for Pierre Poilievre? He's kind of been his own attack dog throughout this campaign, to use the phrase of the campaign, and this is quite the allegation to level at Mr. Carney today. When your negatives are down, I mean, what do you think?
I think it's fair for the Conservatives to be pointing out that Mr. Carney might not be what he appears, and that there's a lot we still don't know about Mark Carney. On the point around tax havens, this is $1 billion a year annually that is lost from the Canadian Treasury through the use of these tax loopholes. Think of where that could go in terms of income tax cuts or community infrastructure or things that could be built. So I think it's fair for the Conservatives to point out that what should be a straightforward answer from Mr. Carney on the issue of tax havens, something that I think the Conservatives are aligned with, the NDP is likely aligned with, I suspect the Bloc as well, should get a straightforward answer from Mr. Carney, but it doesn't. Instead, we get a convoluted answer around knowing the world and understanding how things work, and it's because he has made use of these tax havens before when he was in private business.
For his company, yes.
For his company.
But grifter implies he's personally getting something out of it. That's a loaded word there. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think, putting the terminology aside, what I would observe is just a pattern of Mr. Carney doing what is politically expedient. He decides that they're going to get rid of the carbon tax because we're in an election campaign and it's not popular anymore. He wants to build pipelines, but he's not going to tear up C-69. He wants to build houses, but he doesn't. But he's bringing back Sean Fraser and a bunch of Liberal cabinet ministers who did nothing on this file for some time. So I think it's fair for the Conservatives to get at the root of Mr. Carney's motivations in this, how he has been conflicted through his private business dealings while also serving as an economic advisor to the government. There's a lot of things that Mr. Carney is not being forthcoming about. And he's been challenged not just by Conservatives, by reporters about this as well, in terms of disclosing conflicts, in terms of disclosing the nature of these business dealings. So I think that when you're looking to lead the country, it's fair game to be raising these questions and to have Mr. Carney answer them.
Okay, Michelle?
Well, first of all, those are wild allegations with absolutely no shred of truth or anything behind them. And so, I'm just going to go back to it. David, you talked about how Pierre Poilievre is his own attack dog. If we can all remember when, there was the financial crisis and Stephen Harper was looking to people to be around the economic table, it was Mark Carney who he called upon, and it was Pierre Poilievre who was his parliamentary secretary attack dog in the House of Commons. And to take a swipe about someone not being a businessman from somebody who has actually never had a job outside of being paid by taxpayers is the height of irony. But I also don't think it works for him politically. I think it just actually, when he's making these kinds of attacks that are completely baseless, name-calling, all he's doing is furthering what people think of him. And I really don't think it's reflecting well on him, because he looks exactly like what he's trying to suggest someone else is. Talk about someone who's never been a businessman. Well, that's him. I don't know. I don't understand the strategy behind that when what Canadians are looking for is someone to be standing up to Donald Trump, not to be like Donald Trump.
Okay.
So I think that he's got to really rein in those baser instincts if he wants to actually do a little bit better.
Okay, I just want to show, Mark Carney didn't respond to the grifter allegation directly, but he did respond to what Stephen Harper said last night and Pierre Poilievre's criticism of him. Just have a listen to this.
Stephen Harper appointed me Governor of the Bank of Canada. I worked closely with the late and great Jim Flaherty during the financial crisis. We resolved a number of situations. Many people are familiar with that experience. I note that Pierre Poilievre was not at any of those tables, was not given any of that responsibilities, and note further that in subsequent years he has not gained any responsibility in managing crises or difficult situations.
Okay, Francois, bring you in here. And look, and just to put to be fair to Mr. Poilievre, in 2008, I think he was 29. He was a first-term MP. That's not the sort of person who would typically have senior cabinet responsibility in a time like the financial crisis. But again, if you're going to shoot at one guy's resume, you're going to have yours shot back at. So, Francois, your thoughts on all of this?
Or any cabinet
Exactly. Well, whatever. And the age is a factor, yes and no. It depends there's some people who were very young who own businesses, multi-million, if not billion-dollar businesses. So for me, it's not necessarily relative, but it's a fact that he did not deal with major crisis. And if we go back to yesterday's rally and Stephen Harper, ex-PM, who's trying to explain that these two guys, Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre, worked for him. I didn't know that the governor of the Banque du Canada was working for the Prime Minister, but anyway, I'll let it pass. But that being said, that he would choose Pierre Poilievre, and you can just oppose the words that Stephen Harper used when he congratulated Mr. Carney for his nomination as governor of the England Bank. Where he says that he was an invaluable, the word was a precious partner to help the government navigate in the worst world economic crisis that Canada had seen in a long time. And by the way, that NDP, Liberals, and Bloc had to convince Mr. Harper and his government that was happening. So it's when you put all these things, and then you have Pierre Poilievre calling, like I said, I had to look. I had never heard that word used before in my life. So I look at what it meant, and I discussed with people, and I said, can I use those words? And they said, well, we don't we don't push you that way, because that and words like douchebag are things to try to avoid, because it might sound nice to your ears, but do not use them. So I'm like, okay, so why does Pierre Poilievre, who made a great announcement today on tax haven, who could have used facts and not insult to prove his point, and we could have maybe discussed a bit more the content of his announcement instead of again going on the guy because he just can't stop being a bad-mouthed pit bull. With a smile now, though, I must add.
Okay, look, it's been referenced a couple of times, but Mark Carney was asked about the use of tax havens. He set up a couple of funds from Brookfield, green funds in Bermuda? Bahamas?
Bermuda.
Yeah, sorry, I get the B's wrong.
$25 billion.
Yeah, in Bermuda. It's $25 billion fund set up there. So just take a listen to his answer about this when he was asked about how he would deal with tax havens if he was Prime Minister.
I have a long career in the private sector. I have a longer career in the public sector. What's important is that we have an effective tax system, and that every company follows the rules of those tax to not just the letter but the spirit of those regulations. And we need to continue to refine our tax system to ensure that companies are paying their fair share of tax.
Okay, so there you go. That's his answer there. Emily, your thoughts on sort of this thread of the conversation about the attacks on resumes, the allegations of being a grifter, which is a small-time petty swindler, essentially, is what that word means, and the tax haven issue.
So first of all, the policy issue with tax havens is not that people are necessarily going around the regulation so much as the regulation are built for people to be able to legally do things that are unethical.
Right.
And so I haven't heard anything from Mark Carney that answer that tells me he understands the nature of the problem and wants to do something about it that is actually serious. That being said, I think with what I was saying earlier about survival instinct, the thing is that I'm not sure this issue is what's going to move people to the polls in one direction or the other. It is concerning, but I'm not sure. I think that people want to maybe concern themselves with this after the election is over in terms of questioning him rather than having all the questions they have for also Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative government seems to be what's showing up in the polls right now. And so it's a really important issue. I'm not sure it's a valid question. I'm not sure in terms of running an electoral campaign. It's necessarily the smartest thing in terms of spending that much energy on an issue that isn't likely to become the ballot question. Mm-hmm. We're not living a campaign that is normal. I think if it wasn't for the existential threat, not just on Canada, but frankly on the global economics and the markets and the tariff war that is going on between Donald Trump and China and all of that, I think this would be a really big campaign issue that would benefit not actually just Pierre Poilievre, but very much so the NDP. Right. And this is not showing up because this is not a normal campaign. And just on the issue of Pierre Poilievre himself and what he says, I think that if he wants to speak to the ballot question, which is who is better to confront Donald Trump, then it's not so much about punching down the other guy, but trying to raise himself up. And that's what also he's not spending that much of his energy doing when he's basically telling you that we should vote for him because the other guy is bad and not because he's good himself.
Yeah, he also asked more questions about his crowd size than he takes at his daily press availability, which is a strange thing. Kate, you wanted to get in there.
I was just going to say, I don't think Conservatives are of the view that tax havens will be the ballot question in the next election, but it speaks to two things. It speaks to motivation and it speaks to contrast, right? So the Conservatives come out with a message today, pretty clear, pretty definitive on what they would do on tax havens. They would close the loophole, ball over to Carney's court to give what should be a very straightforward answer. I agree. This is not the right practice for Canada, and we need to make sure that companies are paying their fair share. we see him unable to do that,
did say
which
that.
allows for that. I heard him give a convoluted
He
defense
said
of the tax
exactly
system.
that.
I heard him give a defense of the status quo, Michelle.
One at a time. Kate, I'll let you.
Exactly that.
Okay. He talked about a fair tax system that works.
Sure.
He never said, from
Right,
my
didn't
read
say
of it,
much.
he never said explicitly he would take action on these tax
Yeah, and
havens.
the question,
Right.
the question from the reporter was specifically, should we infer that you will not close these loopholes? And he again gave this very convoluted answer. It also speaks, but
what he said very clearly was that companies and corporations and people should pay their fair share of taxes and not be able to escape those. He was abundantly clear about that.
I guess it comes down to the definition of what is a fair share, right? That's what it comes down to here. And there's a broad spectrum of disagreement, I would say, in the parties on that. But Kate, I wonder if tax havens is even part of the campaign if Mark Carney is not the leader.
I actually think that it would be. I think that the Conservatives have been campaigning for some time on trying to have a fairer tax system. They have had significant promises around income tax, and they've talked a lot about financial policy. So I suspect that this would have gotten some attention. They also have not been taking it easy on Bay Street and corporations when it comes to their policies and ideas. So I do think that this is something that is important and needs to be addressed, because this is $1 billion a year that could be put directly in the pocket of workers as opposed to being hidden offshore.
Okay. Look, one party that has talked a lot about tax haven is the NDP, and one thing that would help the Conservatives in this election will be a stronger NDP, but the Conservatives are not getting much help on that front. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is in Vancouver for day 17 of this campaign, where he continued to pitch his party as a viable alternative to the Liberals and the Conservatives. Singh then hopped over to Burnaby, where Singh is fighting to keep his own seat.
The thing is, we're in it for you. So we're going to put forward ideas that make it easier for you and your family to buy a home. We're not interested in billionaires making lots of money off of housing. We're not interested in investors and speculators driving up the cost of homes. We want to put a stop to that.
Singh says an NDP government would permanently ban foreign home buying in Canada. He would also put in measures to limit house flipping. The CBC's Ashley Burke is traveling with Singh's campaign. Ashley.
David, we're in BC, where there is a lot at stake for the NDP. The party has 12 seats in this province. That's half its caucus. And polls suggest that many of those seats are at risk. And even leader Jagmeet Singh's own riding here in Burnaby Central is in jeopardy. I asked Singh if he thought he could win his own seat. He dodged the question in his first answer. It was only after I asked him a second time that Singh said he's absolutely confident that he'll be able to win here. Now his campaign is facing questions about how it's operating. It looks different than the campaigns the Liberals and Conservatives are running, who are leading in the polls here in this province. Singh's not holding rallies. There's no events with a room full of supporters. Instead, his campaign is stopping at picket lines, meeting with union workers and campaign volunteers. His campaign says that they're focusing their resources on their ground game, knocking on doors, and will spend the maximum amount it can on this campaign, more than $30 million. David?
All right, Ashley, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Ashley Burke in Burnaby, British Columbia. And we are almost halfway through this election. And to this point, we've seen a great deal of cross-party endorsements, especially in recent days. Murray Rankin, British Columbia's former NDP Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, has endorsed a Liberal candidate in Vancouver. A second lifelong New Democrat, Shannon Phillips, has endorsed the Liberal candidate in her former riding of Lethbridge. And in Quebec, former Liberal Justice Minister Erwin Kotler has voiced his support over social media for a Bloc Québécois party member. Françoise, I want to talk about this. Mostly I want to focus on what's happening with the NDP, because party status is on the line for them. And they've got, well-known New Democrats out there saying you should vote Liberal in these areas where the NDP are trying to compete. I mean, where do you think the New Democrats are at the midway point right now?
It pours, it's quite something right now. On one way, we wanted Jagmeet Singh to stop claiming that he was vying for the prime minister job. Now he has to go back to the day-to-day subject that resonate with people, but people are not necessarily listening. So basically what he needs is a good, how could I say, a boost of energy, maybe by the Conservatives. Maybe Pierre Poilievre should, instead of sometimes in his rally, talking about a liberal NDP ruining the whole country for the last 10 years, maybe be a bit more nice on the principle NDP way of thinking, because that's the sole message that is left. I hear Alexandre Boulris in Quebec saying with Ruth-Hélène Brosseau, who's coming back in her old riding, competing over there, that you need some of these guys with a conscience that might just say, hey, politics is more than just one issue. There's lots to be done, but it's quite the combat. It's not easy. Right. You don't know. Maybe the debate next week will be a good time for Jagmeet Singh to look like he can play in between those two guys, Poilievre and Carney. But I don't think that for people that will make much of difference. So they should work maybe a bit more on the ridings that they need to win. He needs to win his own riding. Already his job will be in jeopardy at the end of that campaign. Imagine if he loses his riding at the top, and a few others, that it would be indecent if the NDP didn't win those ridings. So they have to fight like hell, like there's no tomorrow. But it's not easy, and maybe he should stop crisscrossing the country, because there's no point, in my opinion. And if Irwin Cutler had backed somebody from the Bloc Québécois in my days as a Liberal, I would be so furious.
Well, yeah, there's some Liberals kind of raising some eyebrows on that. But, Emily, I mean, Jagmeet Singh's kind of got to travel the country, at least in the early stages. He's got MPs, in the prairies, in BC, and Ontario, and Quebec, up north. But increasingly, like southwestern Ontario, with the auto sector in shock, is going to be tough for him. And right now, it looks like party status is on the line. What are your thoughts on where the NDP is right now?
The NDP needs to save just as many MPs as possible. I noticed, and I think a lot of people noticed, that Jagmeet Singh has been tuning down the "I'm running to be your prime minister" language, and really focusing on we need NDP MPs, period. I think so. It's an indication that the NDP is realizing the gravity of the situation. I think that there's a potential, maybe, but that's maybe their last chance of an upset during a debate, because nobody's going to be attacking them. I think it would be very unwise for people to spend time attacking the NDP at this point. And so it gives Jagmeet an opportunity to remind people of why the NDP is there, and also perhaps have some shots at Mark Carney, who's not necessarily as comfortable as a politician. He's new in that sort of job. And so I think, to me, there's two things the NDP needs to do: is really focus their energy, their volunteers and campaigning on the few ridings in which they are actually, if people are angry at not necessarily angry, but scared of the Conservatives, where the NDP is the option against the Conservatives, rather than trying to run against the Liberals. And then also really focus on that debate performance in both languages, so that people understand that the NDP has relevance in Parliament, and that's really is what it is at this point. It's the issue of reminding people of why you're relevant, because it's the trick when you're doing work with an agreement with the Liberals, that the Liberals take credit for some of the things you've been helpful with, and so it's hard for you to even remind people of this is why. If people are happy with some of the policies that we have, it's thanks to a party that actually has never been elected to power.
Well, Kate, look, the NDP needs to rebound for the NDP's own reasons, but the Conservatives really need them to rebound, because it helps you with the vote splits and moves a lot of the vote back from the Liberals, because a lot of that is people who voted NDP in the past.
We're just asking for 7 more percent.
Well, yeah, well,
that's it.
Well, okay, that's where I wanted to go, because right now on the poll tracker, which is an aggregate, they're at 8.7%, projected to win 5 seats. Now, I think they'll actually do better than 5. I don't know how much better, though. I don't know if they get to 12 at this point. I mean, where does the Conservatives need to see the NDP by the final week of the campaign?
Yeah, I mean, what I would just observe with the polling, and we saw this happen in Ontario, the NDP, through voter efficiency in Ontario, did manage to really pull off
third in votes, second in seats.
What people thought was not going to happen or be possible. So I think that the NDP has always sort of had to campaign like this. They've always had to campaign on a bit of a shoestring budget. They've always had to campaign with voter efficiency in mind and really bring it back to their target seats. I think, though, there were numerous outs for Singh along the way to take advantage of timing, take advantage of a better polling position. He didn't jump at any of those opportunities, and I think there was at least half a dozen or more, even since he had ripped up the supply and confidence agreement to get there. So, I think the angle for the NDP, though, I do not advise them, would be to appeal to principle. Mark Carney is not somebody that has ever fought on the side of progressives. He's somebody that has always been on the side of big employers. He's not somebody that has fought for workers. And he has these business conflicts that raise more questions than they do answers. So for true progressives that are looking for an option to hold a government to account, I would think that there's an angle there for Mr. Singh to expose it and talk about his progressive bona fides, especially considering Mark Carney is positioning himself to be more of a centrist option in this campaign.
Michelle, what do you think? What the NDP are facing and what the NDP might need to do here?
Yeah, I disagree with Kate in terms of probably because we come from different perspectives, but it's a very tough position for the NDP to come in, and I've just been thinking about how I would advise them. I would very much retrench into trying to hold the seats that we have, put all of the resources, $30 million can go a lot of ways in 25, 30 seats, and really just try and focus much more on the local representation. And I don't know that actually in this environment, going after Mark Carney, the Prime Minister right now, is going to be in a favor of one of the third parties. Because I think that there is a real view from Canadians that they want to have a strong Prime Minister to go up against Donald Trump. And I'm not sure that they're doing themselves a service if they were to be going so laser focused on Mark Carney and giving Pierre Poilievre a little bit of a pass or something like that. I do think that, it seems that Mr. Singh is moving away from the suggestion that he's going to form a government and getting to much more realistic. And now it's about not just trying, I don't know that suggesting that you want to have like a balance of power or anything like that. But again, I think it's about that local representation and ensuring that there's a continued voice through those local those MPs who have the experience of being in Parliament before is probably their best bet at the most seats.
Right.
They're not quite as efficient vote-wise as they are provincially in Ontario on a national basis. But that's what I would be just so laser focused on right now.
You got a quick thought there, Kate?
I'm not surprised that Michelle would say the NDP should not attack the Liberals. From a Liberal strategist, that very much makes sense. But if they can't create contrast, real contrast with Mark Carney, and they couldn't create it with Justin Trudeau.
They got the blue-orange fights too, though, right? Especially in BC.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
And I don't even disagree with the strategy of making sure you have a really locally focused campaign, but they've got to draw some contrast on Carney's ties to big business, not focusing on workers' needs. That's, to me, the only path they can take that is authentic, that kind of separates them and distinguishes them from the Liberals.
Yeah, I think Michelle's advice is keep sliding Jagmeet, right? You want him to go down another 5 points?
Pierre Poilievre's problem of being the consummate attack dog, if he could engage Mr. Singh for that.
Okay, I want to move on to a topic that I did promise last week, and I like to keep my promises, that we would discuss with this panel the difference in how the front-runner campaigns are dealing with the media. It's a bit of inside baseball, but it came up, and I wanted to give it some time. The Liberal press conferences, they're pretty typical. This footage is from today in Delta, British Columbia. Reporters and cameras, they travel on the plane at their own expense, we pay our way, and get a set amount of time to ask questions each day. Usually runs about 20 minutes or so. It's up to the national media traveling with the leader to decide who asks and in what order. They don't share the questions in advance, and then local media is usually reserved extra time at the very end to make sure they get in there and don't get squeezed out by the national types. The Conservatives, as you know by now, they aren't letting the media travel on their plane. Pierre Poilievre takes just 4 questions a day with no follow-up questions allowed. And you can see there when reporters are asking those questions, a Conservative staff person holds the microphone to make sure there is no follow-up and pulls it away when the reporter is done speaking. And this reporter you were seeing is from the Conservative press conference today in Edmonton. And we see moments like this event in Petty Harbour, Newfoundland and Labrador, when a Conservative staffer, the person who holds the mic often, pulled a candidate out of a scrum, later put his hands on a photographer, a professional who I know, with decades of experience in Canada and abroad. And then late last week, the Conservatives stripped away a chance for the CBC to ask Pierre Poilievre a question because the reporter the Conservatives offered it to wanted to let a colleague ask a question instead. So, because I keep my promises, we're going to talk about that with the power panel. Emily, let's start with you. Me and you may have similar views on this particular issue about media access. How do you think this is working so far in terms of getting the coverage a campaign would want? Because Mr. Poilievre is very tightly controlled. Mark Carney is more freewheeling. How do you think it's playing out?
I said that at the beginning of the campaign. I think this could backfire. I think there's some senior organizers as well from different political parties who have said in the past we've tried this provincially, for example. This hasn't worked for us. I think it isn't working for the Conservatives because working with journalists is very much a two-way street in the sense that they get to ask you questions, but also in those informal chats, you get to plant seeds of ideas and in terms of their own independent reporting, things that they can share with colleagues who are on the planes of the other political parties, and that isn't happening either with Pierre Poilievre in terms of his ability to essentially, for now, his focus in terms of attacking Mark Carney is a lot less effective when it's coming from the Conservative than if it was coming from a form of independent journalism. And that's not what is happening. And so it's obviously not helping Pierre Poilievre distinguish himself or not recall, I will say even perhaps more fairly, not recall Canadians of a certain style of politics that has been installed by Donald Trump. When we're seeing those images, people are connecting dots, but it is also not necessarily effective in terms of political communication when it comes to actually having journalists out there as people that you treat as human beings that you have informal relationship with, that then helps when it comes to getting to brass tacks and actually doing the hard work.
Right. Kate, do you think this is working for the Conservatives? I mean, we were talking earlier in the polling segment, they're losing with older voters. They watch TV news, and they know we're not there and all of these things. I mean, do you think this has been an effective strategy for them?
Yeah, I think one of Poilievre's strengths is as a communicator, and my view is that every platform is an opportunity to get your message out to people. And I think that, one of the things that Poilievre does well is his responses to questions. We've seen just 2 examples today where Mr. Carney struggled with answers to questions both about tax havens and about endorsements from the PRC as part of that site investigation earlier this week. So I would not be afraid to put Mr. Poilievre out there to answer as many questions as journalists wish to ask. Obviously, their focus on the campaign is much more on social media, digital media, and activation of voters that are tapped into those information sources. But I guess what I would have just observed is that there's nothing that Conservatives should be reluctant from saying, because what I observe, looking at the rallies, looking at the appeal of the Conservative message, is that there's something very exciting happening within the movement. So we should be able to put the leader up there to talk about these issues front and center, not just at rallies, but at every possible opportunity.
But, even at the rallies, the reporters who go there, they're pinned into an area, and they're told if they try to leave and try to interview people at the rallies, they're going to get kicked out. Like it's a real strict level of control that it's just going to create friction, it seems to me.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of that is logistical considerations or not, but I will give a very tangible example. That rally last night in Edmonton, huge numbers.
Sure.
Would have been great to have it be streamed on CPAC, but unfortunately wasn't able to happen because there wasn't the proper infrastructure. I think, again, looking at some integration of more mainstream and traditional media, some of those issues could have been avoided.
Having a traveling media pool, you can
There
prepare
are
for these
some-
things because we've got the gear,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. So that is something that could have been anticipated with that approach.
Michelle, what do you make of it? I mean, holding the microphone, not, you know, the Liberals put it either on a stand or they hand it to the reporter. You get your question, your follow-up, they take it away. The NDP is kind of more of a freewheeling scrum. You know, that we saw hands-on people, the trying to figure out in advance who's going to ask what question, then decide who gets to speak based on sort of a pre-vetting process. It is a very different style for a national election campaign. Do you think it has accomplished what the Conservatives are hoping to do there?
Well, you know, I think that all these decisions were made in a different context, thinking that they were going to be the front runners and going against Justin Trudeau in a non-Trump environment. And I think that everything has just flipped on its head, and these decisions weren't kind of re-examined. Because every time that it is a controlled access or a reporter gets pushed, or, you know, before a few questions that are allowed that day, Mr. Poilievre stands up and talks about his crowd size. It is just another reminder of Mr. Trump. And the other thing that I would say is, just going back to the context in the Times, more and more people are actually tuning in to traditional media, not just those over 60, but actually those over 35, because of what's going on in the United States, because of what's going on around the globe. And when you aren't part of the conversation as much, or that those are the interactions that you're allowing to be portrayed, then it's kind of like an own goal day after day after day.
Yeah.
So I'm actually surprised that they haven't reconsidered that decision, because I don't think that it's actually playing well for them.
Okay, and look, older and younger, I got to give a shout out to Gen X. We're right here in the middle. I got people saying, don't forget about that generation. There's more than just millennials and baby boomers. So
You guys really wear that chip on your shoulder.
Look, shout out to everyone who got AstraZeneca, I guess. Francoise, we got about 90 seconds left. Your thoughts on this and how the media strategies are playing out.
I wonder if the Conservatives don't regret right now the decision they've taken. And it might not be too late to change and get a bit more open and change a few things. We need to see Pierre Poilievre's team. I know it exists, but most people don't know these guys. And it's not by shoving one of your good candidate, by the way, as if you're afraid of what that person's going to say, that you raise the level of confidence of the public who is watching. So I would say there's still 20 nice dodos before the actual election. So maybe get a bit more open, bring your team, let them take a bit of front so that people will have that sense of security that right now only one guy seems to give to the whole country, which is called Mark Carney, and maybe a whole team could get the same level. But you know, Conservatives, and I say that with great friendship in my voice, is always wary of the media, and that, in my view, is sad, because be it that you are from any political party, we always felt that the media was for the other guys, never for us.
Well, I just think the country's always better when we all talk to each other. But you know, that candidate, Steve Kent in Avalon, he's former deputy premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, so he's not a rookie. But he was about to be asked about a photo he posted of himself wearing a "Make America Great Again" hat. So you know, I think they wanted to stop that. All right, I'm not cutting you off, but we are out of time, so we do have to say goodbye. Emily Nicolas, Michelle Cadario, Francoise Boivin, and Kate Harrison. We'll see you all next week. But there's still lots more to come right here on Power and Politics. Just ahead, a look at the global economy as U.S. tariffs continue to wreak havoc and turmoil. Plus, we'll get the latest from our reporters on the road covering the Conservatives and the Liberals. And the Power Rankings panel is here to talk about the key moments on the campaign trail today. U.S. President Donald Trump is hours away from further escalating his global trade war. Trump is threatening to double his tariffs on all Chinese imports as of midnight tonight if China does not withdraw its retaliatory tariffs. Meanwhile, U.S. senators are grilling one of Trump's top 8 trade advisors about this policy and the economic harm it could bring. The CBC's Katie Simpson joins us now from Washington. So, Katie, what more have we learned about Trump's next moves here?
It's full steam ahead. They are not backing away from this plan, and the White House is confirming that at 12:01 a.m. Wednesday, all of these new country-specific tariffs are going to kick into effect. We heard it from the White House press secretary today, and we heard it from Donald Trump himself, who was sort of seeking some reassurance in a very friendly audience at the White House today. He invited coal miners as he signed a number of executive orders about expanding coal production and coal mining in the United States. At the same time, he veered from his comments and sort of acknowledged that some of his moves have created some instability, but he very much defended it and talked about how the phone is ringing off the hook with world leaders trying to escape these tariffs. Have a listen to how the White House press secretary is describing what's happened since Trump came out with these policies.
In total, since the Liberation Day announcement, nearly 70 countries have already reached out to the president to begin a negotiation. Countries are falling over themselves to reform their unfair trade practices and free open their markets to our country. America does not need other countries as much as other countries need us.
It's really leaning into the leverage of this moment. And despite all the phone calls and conversations, there was even that one meeting at the White House in person yesterday with Benjamin Netanyahu. No one has been granted any exceptions at this point. And that includes, obviously, China. China is facing the highest tariff threat, tariff rate, a combined rate of 104%. China is being singled out and really being made an example of because it did retaliate in this case. After Beijing imposed 34% retaliatory tariffs on American goods, the White House, or Donald Trump, announced he'd be adding an additional 50% tariff. Today, Beijing said it would not back down, saying China will fight to the end. And so the White House isn't backing down either, essentially making the argument, when you punch America, America punches back. That was an argument made today by the White House press secretary. So the tariffs are a go. The negotiations are underway between Trump officials and officials from 70 different countries, as Donald Trump says he wants to make personal, tailored deals for each country. But again, there's no real timeline on how long this is going to take or when he hopes to start making some of these deals.
Well, the Canadian retaliatory tariffs on auto come into effect just after midnight tonight too, Katie. So we'll see what the White House says about that tomorrow. But the backlash down there in Washington over these tariffs is intensifying. I mean, a lot of activity today on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, so Jamieson Greer, who Canadians haven't heard a lot from just yet, he's not sort of out there like other members of the Trump administration. He is the USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative, and he is really a key leading voice in Trump developing his trade policy. He was on Capitol Hill today for a hearing in front of senators, and really he was met with some skepticism by both Republicans and Democrats, but he made the argument over the course of this 2.5, almost 3-hour-long hearing that the trade deficit is a national emergency, that drastic moves need to be made to reshore jobs, and that countries need to be sort of moved into action to allow more U.S. goods into their markets. Although he did acknowledge it could be difficult. Have a listen.
This adjustment may be challenging at times, and in a moment of drastic overdue change, I'm confident, I'm certain that the American people can rise to the challenge as they've done before.
So that is what he had to say, but lawmakers, both Republicans and Democrats, were both skeptical and fully rejected some of what he had to say.
Whose throat do I get to choke if this proves to be wrong?
Who pays these high tariffs? In the short, medium term, it will be the consumer. It'll be the consumer. And so I'm worried about the inflationary effect.
The U.S. economy has gone from the envy of the world to a laughingstock in less time than it took to finish March Madness.
I'm baffled. I mean, you're gonna hear from me what I'm sure you're hearing from most of us, incredulous about, I think, probably the worst economic policies that I've seen in my lifetime.
That first clip there, Who am I going to choke if that doesn't work out? That is a Republican. Tom Tillis of North Carolina, a Republican, said that to the Republican president's choice for USTR. So that is where we are in this moment. But even if there is some pushback on Capitol Hill, it's not going to stop the Trump administration. They are pushing right ahead.
That is wild stuff to see. Katie, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Katie Simpson live in Washington, D.C. Well, after several days of steep losses, U.S. markets initially rebounded this morning. That is until President Trump threatened to raise his tariffs on China above 100%. The main indexes turned negative after that. The NASDAQ fared the worst today, losing more than 2% of its value. Markets have been in a tailspin ever since last week when Trump announced tariffs on pretty much every single country inhabited by humans or penguins. For more on the economic impact, I'm joined by Jimmy Jean. He is the Vice President, Chief Economist and Strategist at Desjardins Group. And Jim Stanford is the Director at the Center for the Future of Work. It's good to see you both. Thanks for being here today. Jimmy, let's start with you. I mean, all the projections are is that America is headed towards a recession, probably dragging Canada right along with it. How far away do you think we are if the president doesn't change course?
Well, certainly, and even prior to the announcement, we were running with an assumption of 25% effective tariffs imposed by the U.S., and that had us predicting a contraction in the U.S. economy. Not a major one, but we still had a contraction in there, and we had a contraction for Canada as well. What was announced ultimately, even though the effective tariff rate is slightly below what we were assuming, what we're seeing by way of how this was distributed very heavily towards China, and the U.S. has a pretty significant trade deficit with China, but the inflationary repercussions are much greater than what we were envisioning. So a hit to purchasing power that would be steeper. So in that context, we would tend to review our U.S. forecast lower. And as you mentioned, for Canada, despite the fact that we were relatively spared from what was announced last week, still we're in for the ride, given what this means for things like commodity prices or just U.S. demand in general, and those will be the dominant factors in our view.
Yeah, I don't know where oil is now, but it's been below $60 at various points, and the Western Canadian Select is discounted a little bit there even still. Jim Stanford, a former life, you were an economist with the CAW, if I remember correctly. I mean, what are you watching for as these auto tariffs kick in at midnight and the ripple effect of the broader tariff agenda just move through the economy?
Well, we're getting hit on all sides here, David. Of course, the direct impact of the tariffs that are already in place, steel, aluminum, and then still some of the exports we sell to America have been hit by the so-called fentanyl tariffs that Trump announced weeks ago. It seems like old news now.
Yeah.
Then the auto tariffs tonight. We've already seen layoffs in auto plants in all three countries, Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. Plants are going to go down because companies just have no idea how they'll operate with the tariffs being imposed. And ultimately, there'll be more Americans who lose their jobs because of this than Canadians. But the real unknowns are the impacts on uncertainty and confidence of businesses and consumers. And just the madness that comes out of the White House day after day after day is going to exert a toll far beyond what the economic models that Jimmy was mentioning could predict based on price elasticities and so on. We're in psychology territory here, and we know the psychology has been shattered, and we're going to see very negative impacts in the U.S. as well as everywhere else.
So Jimmy, as the psychology works its way through consumers and workers and business owners, the politicians are trying to advocate for buy Canadian policies, flattening inter-provincial trade barriers, and all these things to sort of build up resilience. I mean, when you look at the combination of measures on the table as a resiliency options, I mean, do they even begin to push back against what's coming from the U.S. right now?
Well, I mean, they will help, I guess, at the margin and over a pretty long period of time. So we have to curb our enthusiasm on those things. I mean, we're going to get hit regardless. Look, this is, pretty much 80 years of globalization that is being rolled back in an instant, if nothing really is done about it in the next few weeks. So there's no way we're going to be able to escape all what this means by way of supply chain disruptions, supply chain realignment. And, we're coming from a position of, I would say, weakness and lack of performance when it comes to our competitiveness or productivity. I would say, we're talking a good game about diversifying our exports right now, but we have trouble being productive and competitive on the global scale. So we have to fix that first in order to be compelling for other markets. And we're starting from distance, unfortunately.
Well, while these, Jim, while these bigger structural reforms and competitive challenges are being dealt with, jobs are being lost, right? 33,000 jobs lost in March compared to the big gains in the United States. Stellantis plants temporarily shut down. Who knows where that contagion is going? The psychology you mentioned, the Bank of Canada saying business morale is at an all-time low. I mean, where do you see jobs going in the short and medium term here? Because we still don't know exactly what's next to come.
We don't know what's next to come, but what we already know is very negative. So we're definitely going to see more bad news coming on the employment front, on the GDP front. I think the immediate impacts on business capital spending in Canada will show up in the next GDP report. And we're going to need to move quickly. We're going to need to move quickly to support the export industries that have been thrown into no man's land by Trump, to help them survive, first of all, and then help them reorient their production and marketing to different markets. We're going to have massive support for workers affected. We've got to fix, finally, our employment insurance system, which still has gaping holes in it. And then we are going to have just a fundamental reorientation. I call it a new national policy for Canada, where the value proposition for investing and doing stuff in Canada is no longer, come to Canada, we're polite, and we're next to America where you can sell all your stuff. That argument doesn't work anymore. It has to be, come to Canada, we've got great people, great resources, and you can make good money here. And this is, in a way, a blast from the past. We've had to do this in the past as a country, and we're going to have to do it again. So
Jimmy, there's people worried about their jobs right now. There's also a lot of people in retirement or on the edge of retirement. I'm in my 50s now, so I'm starting to plan aggressively for that. I looked at my RSPs on the weekend and my phone screamed at me when I opened up the app. It's not a good situation. I mean, how long do you think people will have to endure this roller coaster in terms of their investments, and what can they do to sort of be personally resilient while we worry on a national economic resilience?
Well, I guess that's the $10 trillion question, right? Because the $10 trillion for the amount of wealth that was wiped away in just 2 days, in the first 2 days of this roller coaster. Look, you have a tremendous amount of power that's concentrated in the hands of one person on this planet, which is something I haven't seen in the past. So it's very hard to say. A lot will depend effectively on the whims of this person and whether there will be sufficient pressure for him to back down. And even then, I mean, even if he were to roll back some of those measures, the confidence shock, as was alluded to, that's irreversible in my opinion. So you're still going to have some, even in the best case scenario, you're still going to have lingering effects for quite a long time. But other than that, the market is really looking for, what's really going to come as a support. Is it going to be a rollback? Is it going to be negotiations, successful negotiations with trading partners? Is it going to be the Fed? And that's not so clear because the Fed is looking at the inflationary consequences of that, not really sure that it needs to go, with full-blown rate cuts here. So that has the market really unsure and really looking for cues as to what can really form the bottom. And until we find that, there's the risk that we continue to see the market trend lower.
Yeah, well, Jim Stanford, just to give you the last word, I mean, we don't really know where Trump is going to go with this. Like he's saying the tariffs are permanent, but then he's open to negotiation, but then maybe he's not, and it could go up, it could go down. I mean, how long? I mean, we may have to live with it for the rest of his presidency, but how long can economies just endure this level of chaos and uncertainty?
Do you know how long the rest of his presidency will last, David? That's another.
It's about 45 months, if the Constitution.
Well, that's if he follows the Constitution, but he's already raving about a third term. So Jimmy's point about the concentration of power in his hands and the erosion of democratic controls is absolutely right. And it's jeopardized the global order economically, but also diplomacy and military affairs. And he's over his head the way he's trying to pick a schoolboy fight with China on this. You punch me, I'm going to punch you harder. That's literally what his press secretary said today. And China doesn't need America. He can sign deals with Zimbabwe and Cambodia and even Israel and wave his hands and say, look what a success this strategy has been. China's a different ballgame. China doesn't even need the exports that like they did in the past. And China's a superpower and literally has said, we will fight this to the end. And you should believe them more than you believe anything that comes out of Trump's mouth. And this, to me, is a sign that we're heading into very, very dangerous waters, not just for the economy.
Yeah, uncertain and chaotic times. But gentlemen, as always, clarity and perspective. We appreciate it. Jimmy John and Jim Stanford, thanks for being here.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
All right, well, in just a few hours from now, the U.S. is promising that big escalation in its tariff war with China.
It was a mistake for China to retaliate. The president, when America is punched, he punches back harder. That's why there will be 104% tariffs going into effect on China tonight at midnight. But the president believes that she and China want to make a deal. They just don't know how to get that started. And the president also wanted me to tell all of you that if China reaches out to make a deal, he'll be incredibly gracious, but he's going to do what's best for the American people.
Well, as tariffs increase today, House Democrats introduced another measure that could block Trump's global tariff regime. But House Republicans have so far stopped votes to curb Trump's power on tariffs. So, is there any chance that lawmakers can slow these escalations? Ami Bera is a Democratic congressman from California. Congressman, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being here.
David, thanks for having me on.
Donald Trump has escalated things with China, upping the tariffs to 104%. What's your reaction to that move?
You know, I don't think we're heading in a good direction. I'm hopeful that, cooler heads will prevail. You know, you're starting to see some Republican members of Congress getting a little bit antsy and a little bit nervous. You have Senator Grassley and a few others introduce legislation. Again, I hope cooler heads prevail and we can start to de-escalate things.
People seem to be drawing a distinction between tariffs on allies like Canada and tariffs on China because they're a military and an economic threat. So is Trump right to use tariffs to confront China in the way he's doing it, do you think?
You know, certainly there's a role for tariffs on China, and I would agree with that. We should separate how we approach China as a competitor, someone who has manipulated markets and tariffs in the past, from our closest friends, Canada and Mexico. Our economies are intertwined, and a tariff on Canada is going to deeply hurt American consumers. It'll hurt Canadians as well. That isn't how we should approach, our friends and allies. Maybe there are a few places where we can lower barriers and make improvements, but that's what NAFTA is all about, right? Or USMCA. We'll get a renegotiation, and that's the vehicle that we should use to address Mexico and Canada.
But on these global tariffs, Congressman, like the reciprocal tariffs, whatever you want to call them, the durability of this policy is puzzling to me, right? Because the president is saying his policy will not change, so invest in America. But now he's saying he's open for negotiations, suggesting they could be permanent, but they could be malleable. I mean, what do you think the impact of all of this is going to have on your country's economy and on the global economy?
Well, you're seeing the impact in the markets. The uncertainty are creating real turmoil. You're starting to see small businesses get very concerned. I was with ambassadors from around the world yesterday, and they were asking, well, we've got products that are en route to the United States. Are those products going to be taxed when they arrive in the United States? And I can't answer that question. It's the uncertainty and how the president is going about addressing trade imbalances that is really rattling not just the United States, but global markets as well.
So you said some Republicans are getting jittery, but I don't know if they're jittery enough to take action at scale. I mean, we've seen some people breaking ranks with the president, but, House Democrats, you've got another measure to block tariffs today, but Mike Johnston, the speaker, is probably not going to let that get to a vote, who knows? Or the president is even threatening to veto anything that comes to him, limiting his power to use emergency declarations on tariffs. How do you get around all of this?
So these are longer term solutions, Congress clawing back our ability to approve of or disapprove of tariffs and not cede that authority to the president. We do think the president is abusing some of the authorities that we've given him. But in the short term, hopefully the markets have some impact. Hopefully, folks that are close to the president inside the cabinet can start to say, hey, wait a minute, this is not good for the American consumer. It's not good for the American economy. The president won on the back of saying he would lower prices, he'd get inflation under control. we're seeing the exact opposite happen. So hopefully many of his supporters are going to say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't what we voted for.
But if Congress somehow finds the critical mass to do this, which is difficult with the Republican control of the House of Representatives and with Speaker Johnson there, if the president vetoes it, it comes back and you need a 2/3 or a 60%, right? Like because of your system, like that seems a very difficult task to try to achieve.
It's a stretch in the House of Representatives. I don't know that we could get to a veto-proof majority. That's why I think it's important. You saw these massive protests around the United States, not just in Democratic cities. You saw them in rural communities, and I think that's an American public that is getting worried, that saying, hey, they may have voted for President Trump, but this is not what they expected. I also think we need American companies to start speaking up with a louder voice. I know that they're obviously a bit afraid of the president. He's been shown a level of retribution when people speak out against him. But again, this is damaging their bottom line as well.
But what's your sense with your Republican colleagues? I know veto-proof majority is one thing, but this has been the question throughout this entire ordeal is when are the Republicans going to sort of assert themselves, because it's very much a party that has been captured by Trump. Do you see any signs of them throwing off those sort of shackles right now?
So I don't think the MAGA wing of the Republican Party will, but there are a number of voters that I would put in an America First category that were Biden voters, then voted for Trump because of the high cost of living in the United States. Trump said he was going to address that. I think these tariffs are having the exact opposite effect, and we need those voters to start speaking up, maybe directly to their members of Congress, but also for President Trump to start to feel some of that heat.
Okay, Congressman, just one last question. You mentioned that, things need to be rebalanced a bit with Canada, whether it's NAFTA, CUSMA, USMCA, whichever acronym you want to use to describe the trade deal. What do you want to see in a renegotiated trade agreement between the North American partners?
Look, I think the USMCA, the Canada, United States, Mexico alliance, one of the largest economic alliances in the world, is strong and should, we could tinker around the edges, but let's not blow this thing up. Again, it's benefited all of us. It's provided ability to compete around the world. We do have a process. USMCA is going to come up for renegotiation next year. Let's use that process. And if there are issues, that's how we should do it in an orderly manner.
Congressman, always good to speak with us. Congressman Ami Bera from California. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Be well.
Well, here in Canada, the Liberal and Conservative campaigns were both out west today. We're going to check in with our reporters covering those parties next. Liberal leader Mark Carney is in British Columbia for a second straight day. Carney campaigned in Delta on his plan to build more homes for Canadians. Then it was wheels up to Calgary for a rally tonight.
My government will flip the script on housing with a new strategy to build faster, smarter, more affordably, and more sustainably. Our goal is to double the pace of housing construction to almost 500,000 new homes every single year.
Carney repeated his promise today to make homes more affordable. Now, for the first time in this campaign, he heads to Alberta, where the Liberals currently hold just 2 seats. The CBC's Catherine Tunney is traveling with the Liberal leader. Catherine.
David, Alberta Premier Daniel Smith has clearly been on Liberal leader Mark Carney's mind as he campaigned out here in the West. He's made a dig at her, joking that she should be sent to the U.S. And today he called that simply a lighthearted comment, adding that he respects Smith and downplayed conversations that he's the one fueling Western alienation and breaking up the country. He is heading to her province today, an area largely dominated by the Conservatives, especially amid frustrations from some Western voters about the Liberals' policies around oil and gas. Just last night, Conservative Leader Pierre Poilievre pulled thousands out to a rally in Edmonton. Carney promised, if elected, he would speak for all of Canada and once again use the opportunity to remind voters he's an Albertan too. David?
Thank you, Catherine. To CBC's Catherine Tunney, traveling with the Liberal campaign. Well, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre woke up in Edmonton this morning after that big rally he held last night. And from there, he announced his plan to crack down on tax havens before returning to Ontario tonight for another rally, this time in Sault Ste. Marie.
We're going to have fewer auditors going after charities and small businesses and more going after international tax evaders. The goal will be to collect an extra $1 billion from international tax havens and by closing the loopholes that enable them.
Poilievre says he'll use that money to help pay for a tax cut to the lowest tax bracket. Nearing the halfway mark in this campaign, the Conservative leader is scaling up his attacks against his main rival, Mark Carney. The CBC's Marina von Stackelberg is following Poilievre's campaign. Marina.
Hey, David, I'm in Edmonton, where Pierre Poilievre is sharpening his attacks on Liberal leader Mark Carney.
Mr. Carney is not a businessman. He is a political grifter who has used his political influence to turn decisions that profit his company at the expense of workers and seniors.
Poilievre is also touting his rally last night, where he got the endorsement of former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. It was also his biggest rally so far in this election. These events draw thousands of people, and they've really become a nightly fixture during this campaign. Now, a reporter asked him today whether these rallies are pumping up his base or actually bringing in new voters. Poilievre said that the crowd size is a sign of a movement and that people want change. But drawing an audience that big in Conservative Alberta is one thing. The question is whether he's getting the support of voters in other parts of the country that aren't blue strongholds. Poilievre will be heading to one of those spots, Sault Ste. Marie in Northern Ontario, for his next rally tonight. Now, this part of the country has in the past turned into a three-way race with the Liberals and the NDP. David?
All right, Marina, that's the CBC's Marina von Stackelberg in Edmonton. Well, coming up, our panel of journalists is here to talk about the key moments on the campaign trail.
I am in a unique position in this federal election. I am the only person who can say that both of the men running to be Prime Minister once worked for me.
Find out what else former Prime Minister Stephen Harper had to say. Coming up next. Welcome back to Power and Politics. It's time to check in with one of our journalist panels throughout this campaign to see what's caught their attention on the campaign trail today. I'm joined by Marty Patrickin, who is the Quebec correspondent for The Logic. Shannon Proudfoot is with The Globe and Mail. And here with me in the studio, journalist and author Paul Wells. Happy day 17 of the federal election campaign, gang. Today we saw Liberal leader Mark Carney respond to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper's remarks at a rally for Pierre Poilievre last night in Edmonton. Have a listen to this.
I am the only person who can say that both of the men running to be Prime Minister once worked for me. And in that regard, my choice, without hesitation, without equivocation, without a shadow of a doubt, is Pierre Poilievre.
Stephen Harper appointed me governor of the Bank of Canada. I worked closely with the late and great Jim Flaherty during the financial crisis. We resolved a number of situations. Many people are familiar with that experience. I note that Pierre Poilievre was not at any of those tables, was not given any of that responsibilities, and note further that in subsequent years he has not gained any responsibility in managing crises or difficult situations.
Okay, we've entered the resume shade phase of the campaign. I should point out the governor of the Bank of Canada does not work for the Prime Minister, so if Mr. Harper's talking about that job, that's not quite accurate. Paul, you wrote a book or two about Stephen Harper. What did you make of his intervention last night?
He's a dynamite campaigner, and both of the main party leaders could learn a little bit from him on style. And he's also a absolute convinced conservative. He predicted disaster for the Canadian alliance under Stockwell Day, and then when it happened, said that maybe Canada's not worth it for Alberta. He sees the blemishes in the Conservative team, but he will never not be endorsing the Conservative. There's been a fair bit. I saw that Pierre Poilievre said that Carney should have been fired from the Bank of England. In fact, his appointment as the head of the Bank of England was extended twice by Conservative chancellors of the Exchequer. So apparently even Conservative British politicians don't take Poilievre's advice on these matters.
Yeah, Shannon, I mean, the upside of going after the Bank of Canada, Bank of England tenures, I don't understand it personally. You know, like I don't see the political mileage in that. Exactly. But just, Shannon, just what are your thoughts on what we heard, like from Stephen Harper and Carney shooting back and sort of like saying Pierre Poilievre was at the kiddie table while I was at the big one?
Yeah, we certainly are at the resume off point in the campaign, and they both kind of went at each other guns blazing today. That clip was the sort of more restrained academic version of what Stephen Harper had to say today, because he also, similar to about a month ago, the Conservatives sent out a fundraising email where he sort of said, he indicated that to my eye, this is not accurate. He indicated that Carney has tried to take full credit for, getting Canada through the financial crisis in 2008-9. And Stephen Harper, who was Prime Minister at the time and who worked closely with Carney as the governor and with Jim Flaherty as the finance minister, has sort of said, kind of, how dare you, sir, steal credit from Flaherty. People you talk to who were very close to that policy issue at the time and economists at the time generally say that both of them did an excellent job in the lanes they were responsible for, and that it was really kind of an all hands on deck thing. So we're sort of litigating it after the fact in a different way than it played out at the time.
Yeah, and it was a mutual admiration society in public and in all of these things. It's very strange.
Certainly with Flaherty, yeah.
Yeah, and like Marty, obviously he did such a bad job, they offered him the Ministry of Finance. It's very strange. It doesn't quite line up. But what do you make of this? Harper coming out, big rally in Edmonton, but coming out, the midway point of the campaign like this.
I see why he's doing it. I see why he's highlighting, and I see why he comes out in favor of Carney. In favor of Mr. Poilievre. It would, for me, what doesn't make sense in this narrative. Yes, by all means, go after Mr. Carney for reasons, voluminous in all of this. What happens at the end of the day, though, at every single time, and Paul just highlighted it there, at the end of the day, you're talking about a guy who was reappointed numerous times at the Bank of England, and that he was head of the Bank of Canada during crisis, which we are in right now, which is exactly what Mark Carney's campaigning on. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, through all of this noise, that's what I hear. And I think that's what voters hear. So going after bona fides like that doesn't necessarily work in the Conservatives' favor, I don't think.
Okay. I want to sort of get you your headline takeaway at this point. And Paul, one of the things you wanted to talk about is sort of Mark Carney and his campaign. What are your thoughts there?
Honestly, I was just trying to pick a different topic from our other two panelists, but it does occur to me that
It was a quiet day today.
it does occur to me that Carney must hope that he doesn't have many days like today, when there isn't a 5-alarm fire coming out of the United States, and he's stuck talking about his housing policy. Because I'm not sure he's a perfect candidate for prosaic times. When the next crisis happens, he gets to drop everything, fly back to Ottawa, take out the solid wood podium, and be the prime minister. And that's when the contrast with Pierre Poilievre, who didn't get into cabinet until the 7th year of the Harper government, is most stark and to his advantage. When he's talking about his housing policy, I get to wonder how the 3rd or 4th debt financing instrument of a Liberal government will work better than the first 2 or 3 did. And it's harder for him to win on a day like that. Yeah,
look, his best moments come when he's campaigning from the Prime Minister's podium, right? Sort of thing. But, I want to be fair to Pierre Poilievre. In 2008, he was a 28, 29-year-old guy, and he was a first-term MP. That's usually not the sort of person who gets to see your cabinet post in a financial crisis, right?
I have often been the only guy in the gallery who bends over backward, to be fair to Poilievre. I will point out that when he was 24 years old, Jean Charest went into cabinet on greased rails. So it sometimes happened, even if you're young.
Okay, look, I wanted to put out that context there, so my good buddy Ben can put it on his Twitter feed. Shannon, your thoughts on this? I mean, Carney, they have a smaller number of issues they seem to want to highlight again and again, but mostly it's, I'm good in a crisis.
Yeah, that's what he's been putting in the window from the very beginning. Frankly, it's easy to understand why. It's the strongest part of his CV, his history. It matches this moment that I don't know if there's enough money in the world to buy the kind of luck that allows your political moment to align with this kind of moment, and how that aligns with your capabilities and your history. Yeah. But I think also what we're establishing as we go around this table is kind of that no one wins when they start going pew 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 at each other's resumes, and that it's sort of like the most kind of Poindextery way of dragging each other down into the mud when they start sort of weighing, is this worth this or is this worth that? But when Carney gets to step behind that prime ministerial podium, you cannot buy, I don't want to say something as shallow as branding, but just you cannot buy optics, the occupation of a role like that in the middle of a campaign. I would never suggest something so crass as that, he likes it when a crisis comes up. I think there's no suggestion of that. But to Paul's point, as Donald Trump kind of goes quiet for, I don't know, the next 30 seconds, who knows what comes. Yeah. It's just, there's no doubt that gear is so advantageous to Carney at this point and we're in the middle kind of hinge week of the campaign. We've seen patterns of momentum gathering in a certain way. And there's this sense of sort of, maybe the die being cast after this week. This is the week when things establish themselves in a certain way. So I do think there is maybe there be dragons this week for the Liberals, depending on how things sort of play out as the week goes on.
Yeah, not enough money in the world, certainly not after what's happened to the markets. But,
Marty, there's not much money left in the world.
But Marty, I don't know, Trump can stay quiet. The markets are not going to stay quiet. Yeah. The economy is not going to stay quiet. Yeah. The contagion in the auto sector is not going to stay quiet. Retaliatory tariffs going at midnight. This is going to churn and percolate to the top constantly throughout this election and beyond.
And that's the point that I want to make, is that everything is relative. And I love that Trump today was a quiet Trump day when there's 104% tariffs going on China at midnight. I take the point that a lot of this, that there are no fires being directed at Canada right now, but give it a second. This man's a chaos agent, and he lives on being aggrieved. Anything will catch his attention. And the world's markets, as we've discovered with the stock market, is interconnected. Everything that happens between the United States and China affects us. These are all things that Mark Carney on quiet days can reach back to. Is guys, look, it might not be directed at us today, but the fact is, it affects everyone. I don't think we're going to be lacking for Trump bits in the next couple of weeks. I think there's probably enough in there for Mark Carney to riff on.
Can I say on the resume shade, being the central banker for 2 G7 economies, that's a big deal. And the criticism of Poilievre for being a career politician, beating a cabinet minister when you're a young man and then winning every election since 2004, also a big deal. That's a hard thing to do. Like, put your resume, if you're going to throw the shade, put your resume up against both of those. Like, those things matter. Anyway, Shannon, your headline today is what's going on with the rallies. They're big.
Rallies.
That's for sure.
They sure are. We saw a huge one last night in Edmonton. I think the estimates vary depending on who you talk to, but the last I saw was, I think Edmonton police said sort of between 9,000 and 12,000, which is a lot.
It's a big one. Yep.
For a political rally in Canada. It was in, I think, a disused warehouse or something like that. I also note it's interesting, the optics of this clearly matter, because I watched the CPAC feed of the rally this morning. They had a problem with the feed getting out last night because there was so much signal in the room. And that was a very tight shot on the stage where there might have been like 400 people surrounding Poilievre. And the shot of the rally where the camera was positioned that came out from the party was way, way back. So you see this massive, impressive sea of people. So it's clear also the last couple days, twice by my count at least, Mr. Poilievre has interrupted questions from reporters after the press conference to sort of interject, in a very friendly kind of jocular way. Hey, did you see how many people were at that rally last night? So it's tickling him, it's tickling the party. Easy to understand why. It gives a sense of momentum and excitement, and that people are lining up to meet this sort of internet rock star. I think if you're a Conservative supporter or someone within the camp, it's probably something to clutch close to your heart and tell yourself, polls are polls, but look at all these people lining up outside. It is interesting, though. I sort of think a different Poilievre comes to these rallies, because my colleague Campbell Clark wrote earlier this week, this is the definition of preaching to the converted. And so you offer a different sermon to those people than to the ones you're trying to bring into the tent. But it sure looks like Poilievre is feeding off these. He loves the energy in the room. He's playing his greatest hits over and over. It's like nothing has changed. Nothing that occurred in the last 3 months has occurred in the space of those rally rooms. But the big question is they suck up a lot of campaign resources. People on the ground will say that, could be spent door knocking or kind of working your GOTV. So at the end of the day, I think it's an open question. Do they matter? Yeah. They feel good. They offer a great sense of motivation to your supporters, but do they really make a difference when push comes to shove?
Well, Paul, they seem to really matter to Pierre Poilievre. He asked Laura Stone from the Globe more questions today than he takes from reporters about the rally size. There should be a rule that every question he asks about rally, reporter gets another one. But they do want this image of momentum and strength to keep people motivated, because the polls show a fraying base for them.
If this works, and if he gets himself elected prime minister, that will be part of the mythology of genius that we all write ex post facto. The novelist Don DeLillo once wrote that longing on a large scale is what makes history, and what they're trying to do is demonstrate the longing, and it is real.
Yep.
Roughly, we'll see how it shakes out in the end. But roughly, for every Canadian who wants Mark Carney to be prime minister, there's another Canadian who really doesn't want Mark Carney to be prime minister, and they tend to come out. And it was part of Justin Trudeau's explicit appeal in 2015 that those folks who had been sticking with Stephen Harper for a decade wanted legitimate things and needed to be integrated into the political conversation. They're not our enemies, they're our neighbors. He said things like that at the 2014 Liberal Convention. And a lot of those voters feel like Justin Trudeau gave them the exact opposite of what he had promised. And they're not interested in trusting a new Liberal leader. And Poilievre is trying to tap into that energy and make it stronger. Unfortunately, he's stuck asking the "how did you like my rally" thing to a different reporter every day, because he's not bringing any reporters with him who could tell the story of building momentum
all the way through.
But that was his choice.
And the ones that are allowed in, we're not allowed to ask questions of people, do interviews. I don't understand the media strategy, but that's why I guess I'm in the media world. Marty, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, the numbers are big, and it's clear he reigns supreme in the Conservative universe and has a very loyal and dedicated following. It's like the Grateful Dead or Swifties,
Yeah, and I think it's like a good bad thing almost, in a way. Like, what's the good part? What's the bad part? The good part, 15,000 is what Conservative spinsters are saying. It's between 9 and 12, as the RCMP was saying in the Edmonton Police. Okay, so they're doing that. They're doing it in Alberta, but congratulations, you get a lot of Conservatives in Alberta. But they're also in Edmonton, which is sort of like a bastion of Redmonton. You know, that's where the NDP, the provincial NDP.
Provincially, yeah.
So there's a good bad, provincial. There's a good bad aspect there too. The other thing too, I mean, the obvious thing is, yes, you get all these people out. Maybe you're getting some new people who wouldn't have otherwise come to one of these rallies, but you're still in Alberta. And this is a first on a first past the post system. What are you doing? You know, are you basically going out and getting more seats, or are you basically making your wins as a bigger margin? I think Andrew Scheer, the former Conservative leader, would have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, they did have big rallies in Winnipeg, Charlottetown, Surrey, Hamilton, Toronto. So it's not just in Edmonton. This is just where they happen to have the biggest one. But you know, Marty, to get to your issue today, not seeing a lot of big Bloc Québécois rallies. What is going on with Yves-François Blanchet and his party?
Dude, I don't know what's going on here. I went outside and I'm seeing Canadian flags in Montreal. There's Canadian people and they're willingly doing it. Like this hasn't ever happened.
This is the Upside Down from that, what's the Netflix show? Anyway, sorry, keep going. Stranger Things. I just blanked. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. It's, you know, there's gatherings on Mount Royal where the you know, people are reflexively pro Canada and all this kind of stuff, and it's really hurting the Bloc Québécois. You know, and the Bloc Québécois, Yves-François Blanchet coming out and going, you know, Quebecers don't want a liberal majority, saying things like this, saying things that Carney doesn't give a damn about Quebec. These are kitchen sink statements that he's making because he's panicking because the situation with Trump has completely and utterly changed the political climate and the political atmosphere in Quebec. It is fascinating. As I said before, you know, hundreds of people on Mount Royal this past weekend. You have Carney coming out. I wrote a column about this week. Mark Carney coming out in his very iffy French critiquing Quebec language laws. You have Poilievre coming out and critiquing Quebec secularism laws with an impassioned defense of an RCMP agent that serves on the security detail who happens to wear a turban and says, you know, that I trust my life to this man. Why shouldn't he be able to defend me? These are the kinds of statements that in any other election that I've ever covered would have been political disaster for the leaders. To critique anything as the third rail of Quebec identity and language, you don't do. They're doing it now. There's Canadian flags in the streets that aren't paid for by the Liberal government as they were in 1995. I don't know what's going on, but it's changed completely. You know, the Bloc Québécois pre-Trump was at 33 seats. Was coasting and was winning by-elections in Montreal. Now they're hoping for a vote split. It is really not secure for that party right now.
Yep, this election has shaken everything up. We got less than 3 minutes. Shannon, we got to get you and Pauline. Go ahead, Shannon. Your thoughts.
I was going to say in great glib fashion, like we will know that cats and dogs are truly getting married if someone says, you know what, maybe supply management isn't a good idea and just decides to lick that third rail, but we're not there yet.
Maybe that's what Blanchet needs to do to rebound. You know, he needs to go after big dairy, the lactosa nostra. Go ahead.
This is truly the upside down election. And I think we've talked a little bit on this panel in the past about this sort of pragmatic expediency that seems to be taking over Canadians. You know, my colleague Eric Andrew G has done a couple stories about sort of puzzling over why there's not this massive bubbling up of discontent and concern in Quebec over Carney's wonky French, which I will note seems to be getting better by the day. It's still a lot better than mine, so I'm a poor judge. But there's all these things, these sacred cows, these normal alignments that seem to have, if not fallen by the wayside, at least people have sort of dropped them down the Maslow's hierarchy of needs list in this moment, which again kind of circles back to where we were when we were talking about Paul's pick. That I think only sustains itself and only stays really relevant as long as that feeling of sort of an emergency siren you can just kind of barely hear in the background stays. And so I think a really interesting thought experiment is, what if Carney wins this and then at some point, like Donald Trump goes and takes a nap and chills out and we return to normal life? What does that look like? How does that work for the Quebec?
Yeah, I could use a bit of normal life. I'm not going to lie. Paul, your thoughts on this?
The Quebec vote often doesn't swing wildly. It often stays stubbornly put for one election after another. But when it moves, it's a majestic thing. And everyone who's in politics is in politics to make something like that happen. There's ridings in Quebec, and a lot of them, that have voted for 4 different parties and voted big for 4 different parties over the last 25 years. And what's happening to Mark Carney doesn't obey the laws of physics. That's why we have a Quebec.
But, you know, at this moment, Paul, if you look at the numbers, like you're looking at Liberals maybe outperforming Trudeau in 2015 in Quebec, you know, if you buy it. Like that's over 40 seats is what they're thinking about.
We debate Carney's French endlessly. I have on many debate nights watched the Twitter commentary, and to a lot of Francophone Quebecers, Trudeau wasn't a Francophone. So, and as somebody said, Carney probably speaks enough French. He probably speaks all the French you need to negotiate with Donald Trump.
Yeah, that is definitely true. Chantal Hébert always says that it's Anglophones who are the most upset about his French. And look, she's a lot smarter than me on everything, but especially when it comes to Quebec. All right, gang, we're out of time. Really good to see you, Paul Wells, Shannon Proudfoot, and Marty Patrick. And I am David Cochran. Thank you all for watching Power and Politics. Remember, CBC News Network is now free to watch until the 5th of May. You can watch Canada's #1 news network through your cable provider or wherever you stream the CBC. And you can also watch Power and Politics live on YouTube for the remainder of the federal election campaign. It'll be archived there when the show is over. But that's it for tonight. We'll be back in 22 hours. Hannah Mansing Tonight is next on CBC News Network.